Welcome back to another episode of the Lauren Epstein Show. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein, and today we are recording from the Hudson Institute. So if you don't know the Hudson Institute, they are located in DC. It was founded in 1961 by Herman Kahn. The Hudson Institute challenges conventional thinking and helps manage strategic transitions to the future through interdisciplinary studies in defense, international relations, economics, healthcare, technology, culture, and law. And we're here because one of our guests is a senior fellow, and he invited us here. I'll introduce them in just a second. We are going to be talking about quantum computing. And I think everyone who's listening to the show has probably heard about quantum computing, but doesn't know where we are right now, what the implications are, where we're coming from. So let me introduce my guests. So first, I have Michael Brett. Michael Brett is the Chief Executive Officer of Q Branch. And it's spelled QX Branch, but it's pronounced Q Branch.
That's right. X is silent.
The X is silent. So Q Branch is a startup technology company solving data analytics problems for finance, insurance, pharmaceuticals, media, and energy customers worldwide. They were founded in 2014, and they specialize in developing algorithms for predictive analytics that support businesses with decision-making on price, risk assessment, user behavior. The company has a unique expertise in quantum computing and emerging new technologies. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Great to be here.
And also with me is our host, Dr. Arthur Herman. Arthur Herman has a PhD, is a New York Times best-selling author, a Pulitzer Prize finalist historian, and senior fellow here at the Hudson Institute. He's also the director of the Quantum Alliance Initiative, which we'll learn some more about. He received his PhD from Johns Hopkins University and is the author of 9 books, which have been translated into 7 languages, including most recently, 1917, Lenin, Wilson, and the Birth of the New World. Arthur, welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
And thanks for having us.
Entirely. This is a great setup, I think.
So I want to just get a bit more sense of your organization. So tell us a little bit more about what you do here at the Hudson and what the Hudson is up to.
Well, Hudson is a Washington, D.C. think tank. And what happens in think tanks is you get a lot of smart brains, or I guess we could say formally intelligent brains, in some cases, to ponder on key aspects of policy. And then to present their findings to decision makers here in Washington, whether it's on Capitol Hill or the U.S. government or at the White House. And one of the areas that I've been working in since I came to Hudson in 2014 has been the relationship between technology and national security policy. And this is classic, if I may say, classic Hudson Institute territory. It was founded by Herman Kahn, who was really one of the architects of the theory of nuclear deterrence, of the whole idea that the alternative when it came to the nuclear balance between the Soviet Union and the United States was not either disarmament or a nuclear apocalypse, but that there are ways in which you strategically think out how to the balance of forces between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, so that the world's most dangerous, incomprehensibly destructive weapons could actually become the source for global stability and geopolitical stability, which in fact turned out to be so.
Yeah, clearly.
But Kahn was clearly interested in thinking about policies and thinking about technologies that lie just beyond the horizon, and finding ways to make decision makers, government, corporate leaders, but also the public, be aware of how technologies that right now seem really almost esoteric and certainly defy our normal sort of everyday life and the way in which we conceive it, how these technologies could have an enormous impact on our lives, on our culture, including, of course, government and national security, and vice versa, how government policy can have a huge impact, positive or negative, on the evolution of those technologies. And this is exactly the kind of dynamic that I'm examining and talking about when it comes to quantum technology and quantum computing.
Cool. And Michael, tell us what you're doing at QBranch.
Thanks, Lorne. So QBranch is a data analytics company, which means that we apply skills in data science, machine learning, software engineering to help our customers find patterns and anomalies in data and to help them make decisions. So the kind of customers that we have are financial customers like banks and some hedge funds, insurance companies. We work with oil and gas and pharma as well, and some defense and aerospace applications too. And what typically happens at QBranch is that one of our customers will approach us with a challenging data analytics problem. They'll have a data set or be looking for a data set that can help them understand what's going on in their business. And so we'll design and build and deploy and then operate for them algorithms that help them do that work. And so we use a range of technologies to do that, but one of the technologies we're particularly interested in is quantum computing and how quantum computing will accelerate some of the work that we do, particularly in speeding up the training time for machine learning algorithms, helping us do optimization faster. And so over the last few years, the team at QBranch has been working very hard on the research and development of application of quantum computing to those kind of problems. And so one way to think about us is that we're doing the top-down work in quantum computing, so understanding customer needs, what the applications are, building the software, whereas our friends who build the hardware for quantum computing are doing the bottom-up. So they're building the physical layers and working on the quantum physics, and we'll meet somewhere in the middle. And so QBranch is the application stack that sits on top of quantum computing and hopefully helps deliver benefits of that in the future.
Cool. And so the thing about what's interesting to me about quantum computing, and it became more obvious to me when I was here, I guess it was a couple of months ago, and you had hosted some folks from Canada who were talking about quantum computing and at Waterloo University.
Mike Lazaridis and his team.
Yeah, they've been working on
co-founder of BlackBerry, and he's the grand architect of Quantum Valley, as it's called in Canada. Exactly. I'm glad you came.
Which has been here since, they've been working on this since the late 90s.
Right.
So for a long time. And yet, I remember in the 70s hearing the word quantum physics, knowing that it is beyond my comprehension. I had no idea what it meant. So I think it'd be good to kind of give us a little bit of a history of quantum computing. It seems like is a physical manifestation of this quantum physics that's been around for a long, long time.
Yeah, and I think in that sense, it's a big jump forward from where digital computing, or what now people who are enmeshed in quantum computing called classical computing.
I just want you to know, whenever I hear that word, I think of Classic Coke and New Coke.
What's that?
I think of Classic Coke and New Coke.
New Coke. That's funny because I think about classic rock, right, versus alternative, and quantum is definitely on the edgy alternative side of that. It's pretty edgy. But the key aspect is just what you talked about. And actually, this gentleman here, Michael, is probably the one, because he gives this kind of presentation, what is quantum computer, to audiences all over the place. So I should really turn the controls over to him for describing what it is that makes a quantum computer and what it is that makes it different from a classical computer. But the important thing to keep in mind is that the fundamental science underlying quantum computing and all quantum technology is physics and an understanding of the physical nature of reality, which I write about, in fact, in my book, The Cave in the Light, even before I was interested in quantum computing as a policy issue and technology issue. I have a chapter there about the relationship between general relativity theory and quantum physics. It's a good chapter. You should look it up. My book on Plato and Aristotle.
Yeah, the Aristotle where he's in the people are in the cave and they're chained.
Exactly.
And they see the shadows.
And how the whole issue of quantum physics helps to illuminate a lot of but not just the nature of nature, but also about how our ability or inability to understand nature. But that's all on the philosophy side. What the key here is that the realm of quantum physics, the realm that people like Michael and the hardware people and the software people occupy, this is driven by the science of physics. Whereas classical computing, digital computing, is driven by the mathematics. And this is one of the big changes that's going to take place in terms of the mindset of how we think about and how even practitioners in the computer industry, information technology, will be the shift from thinking about problems mathematically to understanding and being familiar with the underlying physics that supports all of reality at the same time.
So, Michael, when was the formation of the theory of quantum physics? Like, how old is this?
Well, quantum physics goes back to the early part of the 20th century, and then scientists like Einstein built on that to look at things like general relativity and so on. But the real foundational point for quantum computing was in the 80s, where Richard Feynman started to postulate what could be possible with quantum physics and started to think about the applications of this. And one of the realizations there was that if you could build such a machine that could work on the foundations of quantum physics, as Arthur described, then you could use a quantum mechanical device to model the quantum physical things that are happening in nature. And so one of the applications of quantum computing is mapping things like the behavior of molecules and molecular chemistry to a quantum mechanical device as a computer. And so by having a device that is inherently quantum, it can model the behavior of an inherently quantum system in nature.
Let's just so the folks who don't quite get, I mean, I'm struggling to grasp all this. When we talk about a quantum computer, so the physics is old. I know that Einstein, when he kind of started looking at this, he was a little blown, his mind was blown.
He was skeptical.
He was skeptical, right? And so some of the things that make us skeptical are things like entanglement, the theory of entanglement, and where you have two particles that can kind of somehow connect, and then no matter how far apart they are, when
opposite ends of the universe.
Opposite ends of the universe, and if one does one thing, then instantaneously the other one does the other, which kind of defies the law,
and the other counter
we know, I should say.
That's well said. And of course, the other counterintuitive aspect of quantum physics, which then also becomes a property of quantum computing and all quantum technology, is that if you look at it or try to measure it, the connection disappears, and the quanta or the qubits, in other words, the subatomic particles that you're using to process data, right? They call them qubits, just as we talk about classical bits, right? In a regular computer, those qubits sort of said, "I'm gone. I'm not going to be involved anymore in this project. Go find another qubit." So this is one of the big challenges: is to find ways in which you can keep these qubits, right? These little quanta bursts of energy, keep them stable enough and linked up together enough, long enough, that you're able to use them to process data or to move information, in the case of quantum communication. And so that's a big problem, because you can't look at it. In other words, it's almost like trying to shoot a target, but you're not allowed to look at it as you're firing your gun. And even trying to use a mirror in the process may be too much interference in what's taking place.
I mean, So it's hard to grasp, right?
It's hard to grasp, and yet scientists are doing it. And that's the amazing thing about it, is we moved from something which, when Richard Feynman was thinking about it, was almost kind of like a thought experiment. What if we were to get a quantum computer, we could understand use it to process the underlying nature of nature. What we're moving to now is one that it's actually able to solve specific problems and deal with and offer specific solutions to the problems that are posed to it. And that's kind of where quantum computing is headed now, or in that stage.
So getting back to what you said, Michael, was that in the 80s, the idea of a quantum computer was being explored in a real way. When was the first physical manifestation of a piece of quantum technology hardware built?
So I think also that's useful in the historical context to look at how classical computers have developed over the past 50 years. Sure. So I think this year is the 52nd anniversary of Moore's Law. And so over that period, we've all enjoyed the benefits of the achievements of Intel and others in cramming more and more transistors onto the same size circuit area to create more and more powerful computers. And what's happened recently is that the fundamental limit of how many transistors we can fit onto a single chip is starting to be reached. We can't make transistors any smaller than what they are today. And so we're looking at alternate architectures for computing to keep up with processing needs. And so one of the questions that quantum computing asks is, well, what if we go down to the next layer of the physics in the building blocks of a computer? So rather than stopping at the limit of a transistor, how small we can make something, let's go to the next layer down into the quantum realm and look at the weird behavior of quantum physics and see if we can build a computer out of that structure.
The limit of building a transistor is the size of an electron.
That's right. So, well, the size of the atoms that are strung together
You can't get any smaller.
You can't get any smaller than that atomic limit. And
So what next layer down is?
Yeah. It's essentially
Subatomic particles.
Going into the basement of a transistor and seeing what...
That's right.
Yeah,
Using the quanta of energy itself that's released by atomic particles as a means by which to process data or convey information.
And so it's a different kind of physics that operates at that level. And with a different kind of physics, we can run a different kind of math, which means we can develop a different kind of algorithm, which means we can solve different kinds of problems. And so since the 80s, teams around the world have been working to try to understand that physics and see if we could build something physically that could do that work. And it was through the 90s that the first demonstrations of actually controlling and reading and writing and having interactions between different systems at that level were starting to be in effect. And then through the 2000s, teams were starting to join multiple qubits together and understand how they interacted. And that's when things started to get really exciting for the prospect of quantum computing, that, what if we could scale this up and actually build what Richard Feynman postulated, that a large-scale, error-corrected quantum computer that could do kind of computational work that would make solving some really interesting problems very valuable.
So let's pin that there for a second, because I want to keep going along the thread. But what is the huge upside of using a quantum computer?
And what's the huge downside?
And the downside. But we'll just talk about the upside for a second, because I know this is what we're going towards, right?
Yeah. So there are some problems in computer science that are extremely difficult to solve, even for our modern, most powerful computers. And there's some particular classes of problem that characterize that. And one of their characteristics is that some problems become exponentially more difficult to solve as the problem size increases. And so a classic example of that is something called the traveling salesman problem.
Let's talk about the traveling salesman problem. We're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
You're listening to Lauren Epstein here on the Lauren Epstein Show, 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. We'll be back in just a second. Hi, I'm Lauren Epstein. Every week I talk about jobs and careers on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia at 10 a.m. Mondays. Welcome back to the show, and here with my guests, Arthur Herman and Michael...
Brett.
Sorry, Michael. Arthur Herman and Michael Brett, and we're talking about quantum computing.
So we were talking just before the break about what some of the applications of quantum computing would be and what these machines are well suited to. A classic example of the kind of problems that we look for are problems that become exponentially more difficult to solve as you increase their problem size. One of those is called the traveling salesman problem, which is a problem that if we had to deliver 100 packages around Washington, D.C. this afternoon, what would be the optimal route to take to deliver all those packages? And so that's quite a difficult problem to solve, to look at every possible combination of all the streets that we could take and in which order to drop off all the packages. Now, if we added another package to the back of the truck at the last minute and we had to deliver 101, it would take twice as long to solve that problem and find the optimal route. And then again for the 102nd package and so on. And so these problems become so difficult very quickly that even with all the computational resource we have access to today, we can't solve them in a reasonable amount of time that would be useful to us. And so luckily, quantum computing is really well suited to solving those kind of problems. And this is the exciting opportunity of it, that there are an immeasurable number of problems out there that have these characteristics that are used in industrial processing all around the world, that quantum computing could help us unlock the value from for the first time.
And it's able to do this because it transcends the limits that are placed on classical computers by the very nature of how they operate as bits, computational bits. as everybody knows, who's taken any kind of computer science class and so on, everything that's done in classical computer boils down to a series of zeros and ones, right? And every bit is either a 0 or a 1, and then you line them up as a way in which to do your computations. Well, the advantages to the quanta, and they've got a lot of disadvantages, but the advantages to quanta, or a qubit, a quanta that's now going to be loaded to carry information or to process data, is it can be in two states at once. It can be a 0 and a 1 at the same time. And what this does is that then, when you've got two qubits, instead of having 4 possibilities for being able to manipulate number or range data, you've actually got 6. And the more you grow the number of qubits, exponentially, the possibilities for processing information grow enormously at the same time. And what this means is that you're able to solve problems in almost simultaneously that would take a classical computer, even a supercomputer, has to line up all the ones and zeros in order to process the numbers. The image that I like to put it is, it's like being able to read all the books in the Library of Congress at once instead of one at a time. And it was, and as Michael just pointed out, think about the huge advantages of problems that stump even supercomputers, or that would take them hundreds of thousands of years to solve, that you can do almost simultaneously. Not by going faster, but by skipping steps. The key to a quantum computer is not that it's faster, is that it eliminates the number of operations it takes to solve a problem. And then a physicist by the name of Richard Shor said, that's very interesting, because what this means is if you had such a quantum computer that was able to, let's say, read all the books in the Library of Congress all at once, or to solve these kinds of problems almost instantaneously, is that all of the big mathematical problems that underlie all of our public encryption systems will suddenly become transparent and obvious to a quantum computer. The very problems that a supercomputer can't solve, and that our public key encryption systems are designed not to solve, will suddenly become soluble. And it's at that moment, when thinking about what Shor's theorem represents, that's when the issue of who gets a quantum computer gets a little scary.
So that means all of the security protocols we use now for passwords to get into your bank,
what's called RSA, suddenly all becomes available and all becomes open.
It instantaneously breaks. And at the conference that you hosted a few months ago, they were saying within 10 years that would happen.
That's difficult to say. The timeline is tough. The timeline is tough. There's a recent article that appeared, Michael knows it, in the IEEE magazine. I forgot what the term for it is, a newsletter or whatever it is. Proceedings, that's it, IEEE Proceedings, by a distinguished French physicist who said, it's never going to happen. Quantum computers just aren't, it's too complicated getting those, what would have to be hundreds of thousands of qubits together to get to a universal quantum computer that's able to do the very thing that Shor's theorem says they may be able to do. So don't worry about it. So you do get quantum skeptics about it. But here's the point, is that what we've learned in the history of technology and the history of science, it doesn't pay to ever use the word never.
Right.
And what we've also learned is that when we look at the history of quantum computing and quantum technology, that the timeline keeps getting shorter and shorter. So 10 years, I think that's probably a reasonable minimum limit. I think it may take longer than that. I think most people would probably say it does. But the problem is, when one does get here, what are you going to do? It's going to take us at least 10 years. This is what we're working on at the Quantum Alliance Initiative. What we're saying is it's probably going to take that same amount of time to really get us set and organized. First, to protect data and networks, but then also to find what is it the applications we want to have with a quantum computer that could do all this great stuff, but then also do all this incredibly destructive stuff.
So that's scary. What are some of the things, Michael, that are the holy grails, the exciting part, what's on the other side of the rainbow that we can look forward to if we had a quantum computer that would affect my life in a positive way?
Yeah, so I think over the next decade, the scale of quantum computers that we have access to and their capability really enable three different applications. One is optimization problems, where we're improving things like routing and scheduling and timing. Then there's a class of problems in machine learning, where we can use a quantum computer to accelerate the training phase of a machine learning algorithm. So if you think of things like autonomous vehicles, which operate very heavily on machine learning algorithms, being able to retrain that vehicle multiple times, that's really, really useful and helps us improve those systems. And then the third class of applications is in chemistry. So using a quantum computer to model molecular behavior, and that will help us understand chemical interaction leading into new products in pharmaceuticals and agritech and battery technology and that kind of thing.
Think about the breakthroughs in nanotechnology that could come where you could be able to do that and manipulate it at a submolecular level.
So it could be the things like cures for particular kinds of cancers or very specialized medicine just for me. Solving these problems.
So quantum computing can be an enabler of that kind of research and research and development. I'm not going to say it's going to be the silver bullet that solves those kind of problems, but like artificial intelligence and some of the building blocks of data analytics, they unlock an ability for humans to do more productive work. Right. And so quantum computing is going to help us do that at the next level.
So there's going to be a progressive curve of development. The one that can open all the public encryption systems that's got everybody so scared, and I would say reasonably so. It's the Frankenstein's monster, right, of quantum computers. There's going to be a whole series of other quantum computers prior to that. They're going to be tackling exactly the problems that Michael is talking about here. As we learn more and more about the science of entanglement and find ways to get computers that have more and more qubits that are able to solve the kinds of specific problems we put forward to them.
And there are a lot of companies working on this, so Google and Apple, Intel.
And mid-sized companies like Rigetti Computing, for example, also,
right,
which are involved in this. And then you've got companies like Michael's, QBranch, which are helping to build, I'll call it, if this is not an unfair characterization, the support services for quantum computer to make it possible for them to operate in the real world with real customers and provide real services.
And where we are, April 2019, there are qubit computers, quantum computers.
Yeah.
Correct?
Absolutely.
There are not actual quantum programs that run on those computers. Is that a poor characterization?
An alternative way to describe it right now is that we've got early stage prototype machines, developmental machines, that kind of test beds that software developers and data scientists can start to use to test out their ideas and test out what's possible with a quantum computer. The computers aren't yet at the stage where they'd be useful for operational commercial work, but they're the early platforms that help us do that. And so your listeners today can go to either IBM Quantum or Rigetti Quantum, and they can log on to a quantum computer today and start to run an application and download some software packages that companies like mine have built.
Okay,
and
so there is software where someone can program in a quantum.
Absolutely.
Is there a language, a quantum language that?
One of the things that companies like mine are doing is building the software layers that abstract away that complexity so that you can write in common programming languages like Python or C++, the kind of tools that regular software engineers need to use to work in their organization. And so you can access that today and start to play and learn and explore and validate what will be possible with higher capacity quantum computers in the future.
Because this is highly unexplored territory. And so what you need sort of points of entry where people who aren't quantum physicists or who aren't connected with the quantum industry will be able to now use and find new applications for the work that is happening in quantum industry in general. And you take a company like D-Wave, it's a Canadian company, and they'll tell you that they've got a quantum computer, and they do. I mean, it's rudimentary by comparison with where quantum computing is headed. But they've used it, for example, to solve traffic problems in Beijing. The Chinese have used the D-Wave computer in order to do that. What we'll also find out, and mention of D-Wave is useful here, is that there's not just going to be one path to a quantum computing. There's going to be multiple paths. You've got quantum annealing, which is what D-Wave does. You've got ion trap computers, which is what a company just up the road here at the University of Maryland, IonQ, uses. You've got the quantum computing technologies and methodologies that people like Intel and IBM are using. So what we're going to see is, as I say, it's not going to be one single path to arrive at, boom, now we've got a quantum computer. It's going to be multiple paths with multiple levels of sophistication and problems that can be solved.
And it may not be one kind of quantum computer. There'll be a variety of
Things, a variety of modes in which.
Exactly.
I know if
Right.
you Google quantum computing almost every other week, and you look under news, there's always some new
Spend a lot on press releases. They have a good budget for that.
new breakthroughs,
Right.
people solving, and fundamentally, it sounds like they're solving problems around the things you're talking about how to keep the qubit kind of functioning while you're looking at it.
That's
in
still
different pieces.
I
to
think
it.
Mike will agree that's still the fundamental problem and the fundamental obstacle.
But there's all these problems leading up to that problem.
There's-
Like you have to
there's a-
solve.
And there's different pathways to arrive at a solution.
Right.
There's a lot of work to be done. I mean, this is an incredibly exciting time for this technology. What we're seeing right now is that transition point for technology where it leaves universities and research labs and enters into commercial R&D and venture capital-backed activity. But there's still an incredible amount of science to be done at the universities and research labs that provide that enabling technology. One of the things I like to say is that quantum computing still requires a number of miracles to become commercially operationally useful, and some of those miracles are harder than others, but we will solve them, and it will require a interdisciplinary team of scientists and engineers and researchers and policy people to bring together a complex system that enables a new kind of technology and a new way of solving problems.
And I think we'll also require international cooperation. And this is one of the things that we've done when we launched the Quantum Alliance Initiative last year.
I was just going to ask if you could tell us about that.
The alliance is of the U.S. reaching out to its key allies for collaborative work in the quantum technology arena, not just in quantum computing, but in quantum communication, in quantum materials, in quantum metrology and sensing. And as it happens, the United States, although we think about big companies like Intel and IBM and Microsoft and Google as being leaders in quantum computing, and in a real sense they are, but there's a whole range of other quantum technologies, including technologies that will help to support the progress in quantum computing, in which countries like Australia, in the case of Michael Breton Q Branch, and the work of scientists like Michelle Simmons at the University of New South Wales, which is also going to be fundamental to helping to bring about that kind of progression towards the quantum computers that we'll be able to use to solve and deal with problems in the future. Great Britain, Canada, New Zealand, Israel, Japan. These are all allies who are allies both in a strategic sense, as we've built our network of alliances since World War II, but who also have a lot to contribute in the development of quantum technology.
One of the things that I learned.
So one of the things we're doing here at the Quantum Alliance Initiative is finding ways to bring our allies' knowledge and expertise in these areas, bringing those to bear so that the U.S. companies and U.S. government can work with them at the same time.
So that's a great primer, because what I heard from this other conversations was that it's going to take a different way of thinking to create quantum computing. And it's not necessarily the kind of thinking someone who's in their 40s or 50s would have, but somebody who might be 10, 11, 20, 18, 30.
Could be, absolutely. And again, it goes back to the difference between the way people who've worked in Silicon Valley, whose backgrounds, again, tend to be more on the mathematics side as opposed to the physics side, which is why a lot of what you see in terms of Silicon Valley development, a lot of it is not really directed towards the next big thing, but continuing to extend the developments in digital computing. I mean, there's exceptions, like Google, for example, or we could even point to a company like Microsoft. But I think the big breakthroughs that we can't even imagine right now are going to take place with startups and small companies that haven't even been born yet, but will come from that new way of seeing reality and also that new way of thinking about computing.
Yeah, because you started
the quantum's going to usher in.
You started the show talking about this is about the nature of reality.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, this is a grand challenge to build a quantum computer and to make it useful. And it's the kind of thing that will require multidiscipline teams and international collaboration and a lot of creativity and critical thinking from people from all sorts of backgrounds. And you look to programs like developing the space programming and accessing space. That's a good analogy to work on. And then just in the past week, the international work in discovering the black hole and picturing that's analogous to the level of complexity and the level of international collaboration that's required to get us through this period in innovating around quantum computing and bringing it to market.
So I did an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal just about the time at which we had our very first conference here in October of 2017. Michael was one of our panelists in that discussion. We were talking about, should there be a national quantum initiative? Can you believe that was a year and a half ago? When we got that sort of launched and started, it's incredible. And in that period of time, there has been a national quantum initiative bill that's gone through Congress. We've seen more interest in both federal funding and support for quantum research at all levels. And I think we've seen a lot more awareness here in Washington, D.C., but also elsewhere of the degree to which this is a technological race in which we have a very big and very determined rival right now, which is China, and in which the level of effort has to be, as Michael was just saying, has to be multinational, has to be multi-directional, and is going to involve a certain degree of sort of focus of a kind that when we think about the race to the moon, when we think about the Manhattan Project, the op-ed I did, I talked specifically about comparing the development of quantum computer to the effort that we put into with regard to the Manhattan Project.
Are the Chinese open to collaborating?
I think it's in their minds, a lot of the collaboration is a one-way street. In other words, you help our programs so that we can develop a quantum computer before you do and other quantum technologies. I think what we're coming to realize is that these are rival efforts. And one of the big challenges we're going to face, actually, and that the Quantum Alliance Initiative is involved with, is deciding not only what we're going to share with our allies in terms of quantum technology, information, and research, but also what things we won't share with countries who have slightly different ends and different goals in their quantum technology, whether you're talking about China, or whether you're talking about Russia, or whether you're talking about North Korea, which has got its own now quantum research center. Did you know that?
No.
Thinking along these lines, everybody's getting into the act. Michael mentioned something else, though. I think it's important when we think about the timelines and the complexity involved. He mentioned what are the miracles? Well, here's one that may not be quite so supernatural after all, and that is as we begin to progress to develop more and more able quantum computers with more and more qubits being entangled and be able to solve problems. One of the things that will become in the fairly near future will be to turn quantum computers loose on developing the next generation of quantum computers. So,
right, I wanted to talk about the singularity.
Imagine accelerating machine learning, but a machine learning at a quantum pace, right, and a quantum scale. So we could see that timeline for developing the universal quantum computer, I compared somewhat unfairly to the Frankenstein's monster. That timeline could get a lot shorter the closer we get to that 10-year.
So that's one of my concerns. If we get to a computer, any kind of computer, that can make alterations to itself without talking to us or including us in the process, what happens?
I think that's quite some time away yet, and certainly.
But it's going to happen.
The folks that are building quantum computers are using all the technologies that are available to them. So, the machine learning technologies that we've developed over that have come to prominence in the last 10 years especially, they are fundamental enablers to the design work that's going into quantum computing today. But it still very much requires humans to do that design work and that creative and critical thinking that humans are really good at to create those breakthroughs and connect different dots to create those kind of systems. So, I think we've got quite some ways to go before we've got sort of general artificial intelligence and machines designing machines. But it's important to start thinking about the ethical and societal implications of
Quite right.
technology, which is what...
Right, right. Because
that's
I
what the Hudson-
can
Let's talk
assure
about
you,
that. Like-
I can assure you, if you think AI is going to be disruptive,
Yeah.
wait till you try on quantum technology in terms of its level of moving completely in new directions we can't even imagine at this stage. And a lot of the work that we're doing, which overlaps very nicely with what Michael and QBranch are doing, is helping to provide the groundwork for, the mindset for understanding when Q Day comes, where are you going to be, what are you set to deal with, but also about how to take advantage of this new technology in all its aspects as a way in which to make human life happier, more prosperous, and also more secure.
So I wanted to ask the question of if we know now that sometimes technology, well, I'd say all the time in my lifetime, technology just goes at its pace.
Right.
Even if there's unintended consequences that we know about or unintended consequences that occur, we as a society, American culture or Western culture, don't put any governors on it. We don't try and kind of manage it. And even if we manage it here, someplace else, like in China recently with genetic engineering, perhaps, so that we don't have, like, this thing is going to get out of the box, and
Or is going to be used for the purposes that we see as antithetical to what we consider to be
Right.
key to quality
So
of life and
what's the
human
morality
freedom.
around our government policy? Where are we headed? What's
That's a
going on?
really good question, and I'm going to frame it as in a general issue of what, let's call it the ethics of quantum and quantum technology. Right now, I think most of the debate has really focused on, and quite rightly, on the issue of the ethics of artificial intelligence, precisely because of the worries about, do we see a future of general artificial intelligence? I think is very unlikely, but I think human operators will continue to be there and will continue to have access to the plug as our last resort. But the point is that right now, a lot of the issues that we're talking about with regard to artificial intelligence, the time is now to start preparing, talking about these issues with quantum, because the technology is still emerging. Artificial intelligence is here. The developments are taking place. The applications are underway. And so to a certain degree, you're keeping pace with the technology. Very often in the history of technology, law and culture and society has to chase after the technology, is running ahead of us. This is a rare opportunity that we have to actually get ahead of the technology itself and to begin to talk about what are the parameters, what's going to be permissible, and where are our ethical choices in thinking about not just applications for quantum technology, but I'm also going to suggest in terms of preparing for quantum technology. And I pose this to corporate leaders and government leaders who I talk to when I talk about getting prepared for Q Day, right? For the day when there will be a quantum computer that's able to sift through all of your public encryption systems. And that is, what's the ethics of not preparing for that day? What's the ethics of allowing your data and networks to be vulnerable because you sort of decided, hey, the timeline's far enough away, I'll be retired by then, and I won't have to worry about it. As
So just like
COO
with
or
nuclear
CTO.
weapons, because you talked about that earlier,
Yeah.
there is...
Yeah, it brings us full circle, doesn't it?
Right, so we do a lot to control the proliferation of nuclear weapons.
Right.
And there's, countries agree that it's not a good thing for anyone to have them, and they do things to prevent that. Would we take that same idea around quantum computing and
I'm going to answer that real quick, and then I'm going to hand it over to Michael. We're kind of in the position now that we were with the nuclear arms race with regard in the early days of the Cold War, where basically there were two key players, because building the quantum computer of the kind and scale that we're talking about, a universal quantum computer, what we call prime computer that can decrypt public encryption systems, requires a lot of infrastructure. It requires a lot of coordination in terms of scientific and engineering expertise. It's really something that nation states, we would even say superpowers, will be able to achieve. If there's going to be a quantum computer, I think there's basically two candidates, and two candidates only in the short term. But inevitably, the technology is going to advance in ways that we are going to face the issue of quantum proliferation. And that's all the more reason to start thinking about and sorting these issues out from a national security perspective now in order to deal with
And you're talking about
the
China and the
scenarios that
United
are
States.
coming. China and the United States.
But so, like with a computer, I mean, I remember computers in the 60s, 70s, like you couldn't just get one and they weren't available. Now anyone can get one. And will the same thing occur with quantum computers? Even if a country, has this quantum computing, like some kid in Iowa can just build a quantum computer because they're...
Let's hand that over to Michael.
So building a quantum computer will always be an incredibly challenging task technically. So
Until it's not.
yeah, well, I'd say the kind of sophistication that's needed to assemble one of these is very, very high. But the accessibility of quantum computing will become much easier over time, and is likely to be a cloud-based technology. So on AWS or the Microsoft Azure, you'll be able to connect to a quantum computer and solve problems on there. Whether they're beneficial or potentially harmful, that's up to the ethics of the user and the regulatory systems around that to control. But I will make the point that the US government and allies are doing some incredibly good and incredibly important work already on this problem. A quick example is the NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, is right now working through a process of identifying the post-quantum encryption standards that will become industrial standards for all of us to use that will be quantum resistant. So they're already doing the work to get us ahead of that time frame. And so, I think we've got an opportunity to identify and start to proliferate the protections against quantum computing quite early on in this process as a technology.
And I should say, as advertisement for Quantum Alliance Initiative, what we've done in this last year is to develop and create a set of global standards for the next generation of quantum communication technology, quantum random numbers generators, which are truly random because they really depend upon the randomness of quanta themselves, the randomness that's built into nature, of quantum key distribution, which is using quantum random numbers generator in order to create hack-proof networks of communication. We've developed standards for both of those and have presented those to the International Telecommunications Union in Geneva. We'll be going back in August for final approval to that process. So now quantum communication networks exist now at prototype level, experimental level, but now we'll have standards that as that technology develops, companies that are not, or agencies that are not at all involved in quantum technology now will have these standards as gateways in order to introduce them into their communication networks and into their other technical applications. So this is the kind of thing you can do. It's helping to set standards, NIST with its standards for post-quantum cryptography, QAI for its standards for quantum random number generator and quantum key distribution, is a way in which you can get hold of the technology. It goes right to the heart of your question. How do you get control of the technology in ways that's constructive? Because once you have standards, right, then you can require those minimum standards for technology and applications by companies or by labs. And at the same time, you also have ways in which you can further the commercialization and the growth of these technologies as well.
We're going to take a quick break. You've been listening to The Lauren Epstein Show. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein. With me is Michael Brett from Q Branch and Arthur Herman from the Hudson Institute. We'll be back in just a second. Hi, I'm Lauren Epstein, and you're listening to The Lauren Epstein Show, where we talk about jobs, careers, and the workplace, here on 96.7 FM. If you're interested in being on the show, you can give me a call at 240-876-0276 or email me at Lorne, Lorne, at electriccow.com. You can check out our Facebook page, which is Lauren Epstein, and also our Mixcloud account. So if you go to mixcloud.com, Lauren Epstein, you'll find our shows. Thanks so much. Welcome back. We're talking about quantum computing, and I wanted to ask you, Michael, so this is an amazing industry, And obviously you are in it, and I'd imagine people who are listening might want to get into it. What does one need to do to get a job in this industry, and what are some of the jobs that are available?
I mentioned earlier on the show just how grand of a challenge this is to bring this technology to fruition. And the workforce requirements of quantum computing are immense and diverse. So not only do we need people that have an understanding of quantum physics and quantum information theory and the software engineering skills to bring that together, but we also need to surround that with all the other skills that a technology requires to bring to fruition, including business leaders, people that can do marketing, people that can explain this technology, regulatory and policy folks to start thinking about the implications of this. So it really is a multidisciplinary field. And I'd encourage anyone at any stage in their career that's listening to this and is excited about this technology and where it's headed, that this is the birth of a new kind of computing technology. How often do we get to experience this and see this in our lifetimes? And that's why I jumped into it at the stage of the career that I'm at, because it's once in a century type experience to see this happen, and I just wanted to get involved.
So the priming, the education that someone would need, like let's say the physicist, right? It's a lot of schooling, probably 15 years before they're ready to. Do they need what?
You could go that route, but what has happened now is you're seeing universities that have quantum centers spawning quantum engineering degrees. So much more focused, a 4-year program in quantum engineering. So much more focused on the practical applications, as opposed to feeling like you have to have the mind of Einstein, right, or Johnny von Neumann in order to understand or Richard Feynman in order to understand what's going on here. Give you a basic background and understanding of the physical principles that underlie it, but that propels you directly into the way in which you can use quantum physics and quantum technology in a range of other kinds of applications. And let's just think about those for a minute and how widespread this technology has been. I was going to say you've got quantum sensing, right? Using quanta to measure minute variations in the Earth's gravitational field that allows you to detect objects deep underground or even at the bottom of the sea. You've got quantum metrology, as it's also called. You've got quantum optics and the way in which you can use quantum to see and to measure objects at the far ends of the universe even, that we haven't really even begun to understand and grasp. You've got quantum materials, developing the materials that will enable entanglement and to promote entanglement right now, because this is one of the big challenges when qubits bump into material reality, they're gone, it's done, they're finished, and so on. So how can you build a computer, right, made of matter when matter is in fact sort of antithetical to the very existence and entanglement of that's quantum materials.
The quantum computers that have been built are like super cool.
They have to be to keep
they're
those
huge devices.
Keep those qubits in line, or they use lasers, which is what the ion trap.
Yeah, there are a number of different ways to build a quantum computer right now, and different teams are exploring each of those pathways. Our view is that there won't be one winner; there'll be winners, and that different machines will be better suited to different applications.
Right.
And so that's one of the pathways that we need to pursue, and we need a workforce that can pursue each of those, so that we can see what the eventual technology will look like.
So
and I know
all these technologies are taking place now. I mean, we have quantum sensors now. It's being used for medical research. It's being used for energy exploration, and the quantum materials. That work is being done. Patents are being developed in all these kinds of areas. And what will be ironic would be that all of the thing that we fear most and are most expectant about quantum computing, right, that universal quantum computer at the end, may be the last of all the quantum technologies that get integrated into our ordinary lives. As we prepare the steps towards that, all these other applications for quantum technology are going to become available and be more and more integrated into into our lives and into our culture.
And the way people have talked about it is not that everyone would have a quantum computer, but that quantum computing would kind of interface with digital computing, and there'd be.
But Michael was saying, you'll have access to these big machines.
So quantum computing will be a cloud-native technology. It'll be delivered first on the cloud. So through commercial cloud operators, you can already access today quantum computing technology through IBM and Rigetti in a cloud environment, and so it's a democratized technology that gives you a low-cost level of access to it right from the outset.
And what are some of the problems that your company has solved? Like, if you can share, like some specific problems that.
Yeah, sure thing. So we actually just published some work on a financial problem, looking at a method of portfolio optimization where we're transitioning from one portfolio structure to another portfolio structure. So if you want to rearrange what your stocks look like in your retirement account to get to a different level of risk, what's the optimum pathway to make that transition from one to another? And that's an incredibly difficult problem for banks to solve, and takes a lot of computational work to go through that in the most efficient way possible, whereas a quantum computer can help us do that faster.
And you've solved that?
We've added like one extra layer to the overall problem solving understanding of that. So we're advancing the research.
Because that was the other question I had. I mean, obviously people are funding this, and I'm just wondering, is it speculative funding? Is there been payback? Obviously, you said there's some technology that's available. What's the financial model?
It's research and development. It's working through a process of understanding the technology, what its applications are, and then what the organizational capabilities that are needed to support that in the future. So people, processes, tools, how does an organization become a smart buyer of this technology in the future? That's what they're trying to understand right now. And where does quantum computing fit on that roadmap?
And Michael's company also does a lot of work on that problem we were talking about with regard to workforce, in terms of helping to get workforce in financial institutions, for example, familiar with and start thinking about, well, if I had access to a quantum computer, what would I do with it?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't talked about this in the effective workplace.
Or what kinds of problems won't it solve? Am I better off simply sticking with my laptop instead of feeling like I have to go into the cloud and reach out to IBM or Rigetti in order to get certain kinds of specific tasks done? This is going to be, I think, again, one of the key features of this is you've got the quantum industry, right, and the quantum community, research labs and companies, big and small, who are invested in it. But we've got this whole other non-quantum industrial and technological frame, an ecosystem, right, that needs to become quantum capable and quantum savvy. And that's the next big set of problems we're dealing with. Now, at the federal level, one of the mandates of the National Quantum Initiative Act was the creation of a quantum economic development consortium.
Has that occurred?
It's just been set up in the last 6 months.
Are you on that?
I am involved with them in work that they're doing, and
are you
a lot of
that. Michael?
Yeah, we're supportive of that group.
And what they're going to be involved in, and what their mandate will be, is to build a strong quantum supply chain that reaches outside of the quantum industry and quantum community itself, as a means by which to both further quantum research and technology, but also at the same time to foster sort of new pathways of how working in quantum technology can build a business, make money, foster new outgrowths of this industry. It's a very exciting and very, very challenging kind of mandate that they're going to be taking on.
And Michael, I know that your company is hiring. Is that right?
That's
and
right.
What kind of folks do you hire?
So being an applications company, the kind of skills we're looking for are software engineering, data science, machine learning, people with like really strong mathematical backgrounds that can help us do algorithmic work. And a little bit of an understanding of quantum computing is fine, but we work very closely with our hardware partners to bridge that gap as well.
And you're here in Washington, D.C., and where else?
So we've also got headquartered in DC, but we also have a team in London in the UK and in Adelaide, Australia.
And is that common now for organizations doing quantum work to have wherever the talent is?
Yeah, the talent, access to talent is extremely challenging, and so having locations where you can find the people with the skills and experience that we need is really important to bring that together.
So we're going to wrap up because I feel like we could talk about this for years, and we will come back to it at some point. But yeah, so Michael, tell folks how they can reach out to you if they want to.
Yeah, please connect with us at our website, www.qxbranch.com.
And Herman, how can folks reach you if they'd like?
A good way to do that is go to the Hudson Institute website, and you can click on the Quantum Alliance Initiative webpage, and you'll be able to download live streaming of the conferences that we've done, including the one we did in October of 2017, the conference on Quantum Canada and Quantum Valley that you attended, and also PDFs of our free reports. We've got 3 out there now. Currently, one, quantum computing, how to assess the national security risk. One on 5 eyes on quantum, building the kind of alliance network to further quantum technology. And our most recent one, and I think the one that people will be the most intrigued about in many ways, because it really deals with the practical matters of preparing for Q Day, is the Executive's Guide to Quantum Computing and Quantum Secure Cybersecurity. Every question that executive or a COO or a CIO or a CTO wants to ask and needs to ask about quantum technology and how to prepare and protect his company or her company and their data and networks.
Awesome. And if you want links to that, go to our website at laurenepstein.com to find the show, and we'll put links there. Also, if you want to follow Michael on Twitter, it's Michael S. Brett, yep. Brett. And if you want to follow Arthur on Twitter, it's Arthur Herman.
Arthur L. Herman.
Oh, Arthur L. Herman. Okay. Well, Arthur L. Herman. Thank you for correcting me. And thanks so much for listening to the show. That was great, Michael. Arthur, thank you so much.
It was a pleasure being here.
Great to be here, Lauren. Thanks so much.
You're listening to The Lauren Epstein Show. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein, and we'll see you next week.